Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. Today, we are in for a nice little bonus episode to expand a little bit more on some of the things that I was talking about with Sean on the episode about lifting longevity. And I've spoke to a few of you about this episode, some of the essentially golden nuggets around progressive overload, recoverability, auto regulation. Now, these are terms that you may have heard thrown around in the bodybuilding space, in the fitness space in general. And certainly, it's something that over the years, it's increased in the way that we hear more about these things. I feel like when I first started out as a bodybuilder, it was like, what's recovery? What's progressive overload? What's auto regulation? And I say that because, from where I started out, it was like you would always look at what is progression. It's going to be weight lifted, it's going to be reps achieved, it's going to be sets achieved. And that was sort of the thought process there. Now you might be listening and that's your own version of what you would see as progressive overload. But also the fact of auto regulation, I truly believe tends to come over time of doing something. So it's essentially where you're learning your body more and being able to push and pull training and then aid in your recovery to suit that. And the reason I say over the years, I feel like certainly we can get into lifting weights or whatever discipline you are part of, and we find ourselves essentially wanting to progress so much that we can forget about some of the fundamental things that actually, and this is what I want to talk about today, that actually could really enhance your training, your recoverability, and your ability to progress over time. Because, yes, bodybuilding, sports in general, it's going to attract people that are doers, people that want to achieve and succeed. And yes, there is an element of when you first get into any discipline, particularly when we talk about bodybuilding, there is the potential of a novel stimulus accrued. So when we look at that, what does a novel stimulus mean? And this is a good place to start the episode today because it may be that you're not 100% sure with what a novel stimulus is, what the newbie gains are, and this is what it's sort of phrased as in the bodybuilding space. Newbie gains, what does that mean? And when we look at this, when you go into a discipline like weight training, you can generally speaking, and it's going to be person dependent very much so, and so is a lot of what I talk about today. You can find that you progress quite quickly because you get in the gym, you start with a blank canvas, and you're able to start to learn how to lift, start to learn what loads you're going to lift, and you might find that over that first maybe even year or so, that you're able to progress lifts quite nicely. Your execution improves, your confidence improves when you lift, and that's going to be a big thing as well. And then over the years, how do we facilitate progression? And this is where I feel like it is certainly giving merit to doing an episode on this because it's generally speaking thought provoking you guys who are either getting into the sport and you're looking at doing this for a long period of time, or perhaps you've already been doing this for a number of years and it's like, what does progression look like for me? So I mentioned novel stimulus, so that ties into newbie gains, but also an expansion on that. If you are out of the gym for a period of time, if something happens and you're not able to train, then when you go back to the gym, you can also find that there's a bit of a novel stimulus acquired. So, what would be an example of this? And a good one that I can relate to myself from personal anecdote was essentially having knee surgery and not being able to train for a really extended period of time. So, during that time, literally no weight training for it was about 8 weeks. And, when I started to go back to the gym, there's a novel stimulus there because I haven't done it for an extended period of time. Now, with the injured area, if you're coming back from surgery, injury, anything of that nature, You can find that you accrue a novel stimulus going back to it. So you feel the muscle ache. That's a good sign when you're getting back into training. You can see and feel areas respond fairly quickly. Now, as I said, this is so person dependent, but this is just an example of what I would label as like a novel stimulus. And that can be a really nice way to, get back into training, see things happen again fairly quickly when you get back to it. And it's like, oh, this is quite good. I'm feeling good being back. I feel like I'm almost, not quite, but getting almost the newbie gains again. So that's what I would say is, your first port of call with progression when you first get into weight training. You can have this period of time where you're able to progress quite well, quite quickly, and you feel good. And then it's like, where does that go? Now, I've already mentioned what a lot of people are going to view as progressive overload: the load, the reps, the sets. Of course, over time, we are looking to lift more, we're looking to do more. But this is where I say I feel the merit in doing an episode about this. There's so many little things that we can do as bodybuilders to continue facilitating progression. Because, and this is what we could call the low hanging fruit, as it were. We can often just focus on, I need to progress load, I need to progress load, I need to progress load. But it's literally impossible to up your load every session. After 12 years, I'd be lifting fucking phenomenal amounts. It's not possible. We're not superhuman. Yes, over the years, I've lifted more load. But even as an example, right, if you were to talk about dumbbell lateral raises, like I lift, and this depends on my rep range, but the highest weight I lift for a lat raise is 7.5. Now, I've been training 12 years. So I would have had to start at literally nothing to accrue 12 years of lifting load, and the increments of the load would have to be so fucking small to get to only 7.5 12 years in. That's just a novel example there. So how do we look to facilitate progressive overload? Now, this is also going to be based on your training format, how your training is structured, whether you do mesocycles, macrocycles, whether you just run a plan all year round. Ideally speaking, we're looking at having blocks of training and focuses within those training blocks. So as I say, when you first get into the gym, maybe it's you've got like a fairly generic, full body split over the week. Maybe you do push pull legs, maybe you do upper lower, whatever that looks like for you. And that certainly is going to bring those gains, right? Generally speaking. As you progress as a lifter, as you become more intermediate or advanced, there's options to do things like specialization blocks. So when I work with clients, this is for Gen Pop clients as well. When I'm working with competitors, we're going to look at areas to bring up based on judges' feedback, or if they haven't competed and we're doing an off season together before a prep, I can do my physique assessment and I can say, okay, these are the areas that I want to look to specialize on. So when we look at this, and a really nice way to have it in your mind as to what am I talking about here with training programming, having a training block, what does that look like over an extended period of time? And this essentially is the coach's job, if your coach is doing training for you. But being able to have an idea as to what this looks like is a really nice thing for your own education and your own development as an athlete. Now, you might be someone that just wants a plan and you just crack on. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I like to do is bring my clients on board and also talk to them about the structure of the mesocycles, how we're going to build that if we're doing specialization blocks, giving an idea into how long we're going to run those specialization blocks and if we're going to repeat those cycles. So as an example for you guys, if I was looking at a specialization block on, let's go glutes and delts for bikini. So it might be that we could run a block before doing a deload. We maybe run that same block 2 or 3 times. If the physique is responding, if the athlete is happy, if we are seeing progression, we could easily do that for 2 to 3 blocks of training with those deloads in between. Could that go for longer? Potentially, depending on the athlete. But it's a good idea to start thinking about what we specializing on, how are we going to monitor that, and what we're looking at over each block. So if you go with an example of 2 to 3 blocks run through with the deloads in the middle, then you can see from the first block, start to end, are we seeing the progression facilitated on the physique? Have a deload, run that block again. If everything's going well, we're still seeing progression. Are we still seeing the progression there? Do we need to tweak things? Have things changed? Has an area come up really nicely and really quickly? Do we need to change the volume, change what we're doing across the other body parts? And this is where the smart programming, the more advanced level programming, I believe is important if you want to get your best buck bang for your buck. Bang for your buck. I'm not very good at those analogies. But again, when we do look at training, it's like, and this is the thing when you are looking at a coach, when you're looking to progress your physique, there is, for me, a thought process into, is your training bespoke to you? And have you got an idea as to what you're training for, right? Like, are you just training and hoping for the best? Or are you actually facilitating progression on, as I said, areas you need to bring up? Is there enjoyment from your training plan? And do you understand what progressive overload is, aside from trying to lift more and trying to do more reps and sets? So this is important to ask yourself, because again, as I've said, this is going to develop you as an athlete, and maybe this isn't your vibe. And as I've said, you just want a plan created and you just crack on. But I feel like you're going to miss out on an opportunity there. That's just me personally. This is the thing, right? I can say my mythologies, my thought processes, but this needs to be what you want from your bodybuilding, what you want from your training, what you want for your progression, but also what you want from your longevity of training for potentially multiple years at a time. Now, you might not have even thought about these things, right? And this is why I want to talk about it, because certainly when I started out, it was like I didn't really ask questions. I did the training plan, right? I was just like, cool. I'll just crack on and do the training plan. Did that facilitate halts in my progress? I believe yes. However, I did progress over the years, and I have progressed over the years. So there's still progression there, but I truly, truly believe now I'm more in control with my training that I could have progressed a lot more. Would I change it? As I said before, no, because it's my journey. And right now, I've got this huge, huge drive, inspiration, fire to share my knowledge about it, but also to continue doing what I'm doing. And I can't see that I'm ever going to stop bodybuilding. And that's, having renewed focus, renewed fire after 12 years is a pretty fucking cool feeling. So I'm not going to, bash what I've done in the past. I'm not going to regret what I've done in the past, but what I'd like to do is talk about it. And also, it gives me, so many opportunities to work with you guys, work with my clients, be able to facilitate their progression because I've got skin in the game. And that's important. It truly is important. You will see that there are coaches out there that they do the copy and paste training plans. Again, if that's your vibe, it's your vibe. But do you know if it's copy and paste if you don't really understand what copy and paste is? A really easy way to do this, guys, is to ask other clients of your coach if you can see each other's training plans. If they're the same, it's generally speaking probably going to be down the copy and paste route. This is not me calling anyone out or slagging anyone off. It's just me stating facts of what are you paying for and are you happy with that as your training. Now, when we then look at your training plan, sometimes there are, and I've seen this more often nowadays, people that do their training separately and then they have a coach for the check-ins, the nutrition, and if you're assisted, the PEDs. And there's a reason for that because some coaches aren't, the training isn't their strength. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We can't all be good at everything, right? It's like I always say, it'd be like me trying to, say I'm a gut health specialist and I'm a perimenopausal specialist and the list goes on there. I'm not going to do it because there's no fucking point. You're paying for a service and if you're sold a dream, it is not fair. So when we translate this into programming, if you do have a coach that does that separately, sometimes you're potentially going to get that more in tuned eye. You're going to get more from your training, and maybe you're going to educate yourself more, and you can work in tandem with a physique coach. So I have worked with, off the back of my surgery, Josh, who did my rehabilitation and has helped me specialize in getting some delts and getting a back, which is brilliant. Also, to obviously rehabilitate my leg. Now, what that has shown me is that there is so much more to training that I hadn't unlocked myself. As I say, I'm not here to say, oh, this should have been done early days, but we have to be realistic here. Is your coach able to specialize in training, nutrition, physique response, da di da di da? Or is there room for a more tailored approach to your training? You may have a coach that is good at all of them and they're able to assist with the training, the nutrition, and the PEDs. What I would say is this is what I do for my clients, and it does take longer. I've mentioned this before. I'm never going to be someone that has hundreds of clients because I just purely would not have the time to do that of the nature that my coaching is. Because even building out, a specialization block, a training block, setting up the mesos, ensuring that there's a timeline in place, it takes a lot of time. But that's personally how I like to operate. Your coach might be the same. If they are, you wouldn't probably need to outsource your training. And this is questions for you. This is thought provoking for you. When we tie this into progressive overload, what is your understanding of training? Where are you at with being able to understand training as a discipline, right? Now, we can all go to the gym and throw around weights, but are you looking at execution? Are you looking at intention? Are you looking at mind muscle connection? Are you looking at being able to lift load effectively and actually be able to progress your training? Because all of those things I've just mentioned, for sure, that's where I say things could have been a hell of a lot fucking better. But I've needed to learn. Now, what I've been able to do since the surgery is build my training basically from the bottom up. And I don't mean lower half. I mean, I've literally, it's like, I feel like almost that I'd never trained before going into this new phase, having a training specific coach, being able to learn from him also. And I say that, but what I would say is the first change for me was understanding kit. So I trained for like 10 years on fucking techno gym kit. And, yes, again, you can still facilitate progression. I've progressed my physique. I won Miss Universe with techno gym, right? So it's not that bad. And we've got to have a little laugh at these things. However, now having my eyes opened to kit and that starting after I left the gym that I worked at, which had techno gym kit, I actually moved to a Nuffield and they had really sick kit. And then I went to RS Gym, which is Chichester way. And I was like, shit, fucking hell. I don't feel like I've ever trained. Then Thailand, sick kit, sick gyms. So I got a lot from that. And then obviously had the surgery. And now I've got Destination Gym. So there's been almost an evolution to it, but my gratefulness for kit started off the back of leaving the gym and coming away from using Techno Gym. Now, again, this is not me saying you can't progress on Techno Gym kit. However, it is me saying that I personally have noticed huge progressions with my mind to muscle connection, with my even intuition with training, with my performance, with my execution. The list literally goes on. My enjoyment for training is fucking night and day difference. And my love for kit now is next level. I just feel, I mean, every time I train, I feel fucking grateful. And that's, of course, from not having it, but also it just brings about a different vibe to your training when you understand kit, when you understand how your body moves, and you understand how to set up kit. Because let's go into what I'm talking about as an expansion of progressive overload. So, mind muscle connection. Now, this is I guess this is almost a subject that you could sort of, it could be a bit woo woo, a bit thrown out of like, what the fuck's that? I'm just training. I'm just training. Again, everyone's got their own way to train, and this podcast is not about you should train like I say you should train. This is talking about different things to consider. So when we talk of the mind muscle connection, and then we tie that into intention from your training, feeling the muscle work that you're meant to be training. Now that seems obvious, right? Like, obviously, I want to train the muscle that I'm training, but there is differences when you're looking to specialize, bring up certain areas, and be able to facilitate really progressing beyond the load, the reps, and the sets. So, as an example, and this might be something that some of you guys would struggle with, as it were. For years, it's just been hard to activate my lats, to be able to feel my lats. I also had this with glutes for a number of years. It took me about 5 years before I felt my actual glute activate. But being able to facilitate what we're looking at from, and lats as the example, and this is a good example because a lot of people struggle with this in the posing, including myself. How do we activate the lats? We can't see anything, right? It's like, what do I do? I bring my shoulders up, I bring my shoulders back, I try and widen my back. I don't really know what I'm doing here. Okay, and it can just feel quite hard to connect. So what this leads into is where I'm saying with intention and mind muscle connection, being able to train my lats properly has helped my posing, my mind muscle connection, and training. There's a difference between just training back and just going in and rowing and lat pull down and whatever, to actually really getting into the activation of something like your lats and really trying to specialize on what you're trying to do there. And the difference in my physique and my training overall is a night and day difference. And does this take time? Yes, it can take time. And what we want to try and do is to be able to, and this is where, the argument to load being such a driver for progression, if we're so transfixed on load, I've done this myself, we can end up almost what we call ego lifting. So you're just throwing around weight. Now, there are points, right, where sometimes I want to be a bit of a dickhead, and I'll do my if I've got 3 sets, I do my first 2 sets, and I'm like, I just want to lift fucking heavier. And can we have a few sloppy repetitions at the end of a set? I don't see a problem unless you're going to injure yourself. There's sloppy and then there's being stupid. So doing that, and sometimes letting the ego out a little bit and just going, fuck it. I'm just gonna, squeeze some extra reps out there. The reps are a bit sloppy. Okay, I'm still in control. I can still lift the load. I'm not saying, there's not room to do that at times, depending on who you are, depending on what your training is, your training experience, etc. But what I would say is, when you're able to really strip it back and really control the movements, being able to activate the area that you're actually training, it feels so different, right? Like if I'm doing, something like a single arm close grip row, whether that's on a machine, whether that's on a cable. I remember when I started doing this on this new training plan with Josh. It is specific lats is the movement we want. And I'm doing it and I'm like, okay, drop the load a bit, drop the load a bit. Send the training videos, he critiques it for me. So I'm doing and I'm thinking lats. And, a few weeks in, and then I'm like, lats. Shit. I've never felt my lats like this. And this is the thing, right? Like, there is a level of taking ownership to your training and how you're viewing your training. If you just going in the gym, rushing around, supersetting everything, fucking off because your life's busy, fine. There might be a place for it for you. If that's all you can do, if that's all you can manage, it is what it is. However, what I found is being able to allow extra time when I train. I'm normally at the gym for about an hour and a half, and there's a lot of single arm movement, there is single leg movement for the rehab stuff, and it takes longer. I also feel like probably in the past when I try and squeeze it in and I try and just get my progressions, get my session in, get it done, that I would almost like I would put off doing single arm, single leg stuff because it takes too long. But this is where we can all evolve in how we view training and what we want from it. And if actually, allowing a bit more time to be a bit more specific with your training, maybe that's going to serve you. And that's important to think about. So, as I say, the mind muscle connection, the intention, and being able to utilize that, I believe, is a huge contributor to how your physique is going to progress, particularly if you've been doing this for a number of years, right? And that's going to facilitate, in turn, if you do really activate, if you really do, bring the load down to a load that is appropriate for you to be able to perform. And then over time, you're going to progressively overload. You're going to potentially lift more. Maybe you do another rep. Maybe you add an additional set depending on your volume. The list goes on in that regard. And like Sean explained it, it's like when you look at stocks and shares, they go up and down, up and down. So if you looked at a week, it's like up and down. Whereas if you looked at 10 years worth, generally speaking, how he described it, they go up and down in a week and a month. But over time, and I realize this is audio, I know some of you will be watching on YouTube, but what I'm doing with my hands here, guys, is, if you imagined over time a bar graph, it goes, you've got a 10-year period, it goes up over time, even though it goes up and down within that time. There's a trend up over time, and that is your lifting career, as it were. And that was really nice to hear that as a visual representation of what we're trying to do. And that's promoting that lifting longevity. Now, when we look at the gym as a whole, at training as a whole, and how we then look to structure appropriate recovery if you do utilize deloads, what does that look like? Like, how do we know when would I need to do a deload? Now, with myself and my clients, I know my clients very well. They know me very well, and we we know when a deload is appropriate. Some of my guys, we do structure it for a set time. So we say, okay, we're going to run this meso for 8 weeks, as an example, and then we're going to do a deload because some of my clients, it's literally almost, some sort of mystic ball. It's always around the 7 to 8 weeks where the things kick in that are showing the overreach is happening, and we can sort of pre-program that. However, all of my clients, I will always say, we're getting close to deload. How are we feeling? Some of my clients will do an active deload if their preference is to still be in the gym for whatever reason that is. There's a multitude of things there, and we don't need to expand on that so much. But potentially they go to the gym 5 times a week and they bring it down to 2 or 3 and they do some pump sessions for, as I say, a multitude of different reasons. Some of my clients, including myself, will have a whole week off. Sometimes that is shorter. Again, that can be for different reasons, but it might just be a 4-day wash off, a long weekend, and then going back into a new meso. So there's different ways to look at it. But how do we know, like, how do we learn, oh, I need a deload? Like, I feel like I need a deload. And what the fuck is overreach, right? A lot of the time, it's like, I feel like we could, probably a lot of us could just keep pushing. What I would say is, if you can just train all year round, are you training hard enough? That's a question for you. I personally could not train as I do all year round. Absolutely not. The longest I've done a meso for since surgery is 12 weeks. But obviously, my meso is there is a huge preference towards rehab stuff also. If I was doing a full proper training program with the ability to use both of my legs and really push the lower portion, which is getting better, but if I was doing it as a normal bodybuilder, an able body bodybuilder, I absolutely would not be able to do 12 weeks. I can tell you that, hands fucking down. Absolutely not. It would not be a possibility. So that's a question to ask yourself. If you don't have deloads programmed in, if you don't know what a deload is, if you've never heard of it, if your coach hasn't mentioned it, then perhaps it's a conversation. I'll leave that up to you. I don't want to get too into unknown territory with, if you're being coached and that's not a thing. Again, everyone has a different ways to do it. Also, an extension of this, if you train pretty average, as it were. And that's not being, I'm not being critical there. But if you're not training intensely, you might find you don't need a deload. So that's another extension of that. Now, when we look at recovery, being able to learn your body, being able to know when progressions are halting, as it were, and that actually probably we need to look at something like a deload or some auto regulation. What does that look like in reality? And that's taken me a number of years to understand it, because it's not more is more. Sometimes there's an argument that less is more, but that's, there's caveats all over the gaff with that. What I would say is that we can start to learn our bodies more if we want to. So, some really easy signs for myself, and this also relates to many of my clients when we are hitting a point of overreach. And these are things, and I'll go through them as a sort of a list, as it were, because you could listen and go, ah, ah, ah. So, disturbance to sleep. So, you can become more restless at night. You can notice a dip in your mood. Now, obviously, there's a whole world of things that can affect your mood and your sleep, and all of these things I'm going to talk about. So, just just take this for what I'm talking about here, the specifics of learning signs that you are potentially going towards overreach. So, disturbance in sleep, sometimes mood, sometimes energy, sometimes we can notice changes in appetite, and actually you can feel appetite suppression because your central nervous system is just feeling fucked, and actually you think, God, my hunger's suppressed. What the fuck's going on? You can also notice the obvious signs of training progression stalling. So training you can just feel battered every training session. You can feel that you're not able to facilitate progressions through reps, sets, load. You feel your intention is going down. You feel like almost that you're not able to get a good pump. Now, this is going to relate to the phase you're in as well when we're talking about a good pump. However, aside from that, it just feels like you're sort of going through the motions. You can sometimes see things happen with, essentially, when we look at the overall well-being, you can just feel, and that I guess combines everything I've said there, a bit down, a bit gloomy, just general well-being being hit, almost like you feel a bit unwell. All of these things are certainly signs that I get when I am starting to head towards overreach. And I know now I can pull a deload. I always, have one in my mind, generally speaking, after around 8 weeks of a block. But if I need it earlier, then I will take it. Because this is the thing. If you start to see almost regression from training, are you going to risk injury? Are you going to risk getting run down? Are you going to risk burnout? Is it going to be enjoyable? Because this is the thing as well. I don't find yeah, I can push through, but if I know I'm overreached, if I know I'm not facilitating progression, my sleep is whacked, all of these things, it's not going to hit the same. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to go into every session feeling fucking amazing, but generally speaking, if you're feeling battered. It's almost like sometimes I'm like, I feel like I've got the fucking flu. I probably shouldn't be trying to overegg training here. So that's some thought processes towards deloads and being able to understand that more. Now, what I'd say is that you track and trend and you look at these things. So, and this is what I do with clients. If I have clients reporting certain things around certain times of where they are at in a training block, I'm like, that happened last training block around week 6, as a fictitious example. Okay, so these are the signs that you're heading towards overreach. These are the signs that you can start understanding as an athlete, that it's like, coach, I feel like I'm starting to head towards a point where progressions are slowing down. Maybe we need to look at a deload if there's not one already programmed. And this is the type of thing you can do. Hopefully you have a coach that's open to having these conversations, because it's really fucking cool. You're able to actually learn about training and yourself. Now, when it comes to, and the final thing to talk about here, and that's what we spoke about on the pod with Sean as well, is auto regulation. What the fucking hell is that? And that sort of ties into deloads, recoveries, etc. to a certain degree. But in my mind, auto-regulation and learning that, it's again being more in tune with your body. So are there going to be weeks where maybe you need to pull back a touch and you're going into the gym to do the gym to still be able to train, but there's other things going on that means this week is going to be harder than normal. Maybe you don't need a deload. Maybe you still want to go to the gym for mental health. Maybe you still want to just go to the gym, but it's not going to be a week where your progressions are flying and you know that. Now, how do we then respond to that appropriately? How can we take our emotional side of this thought process of not doing the gym? How can we go, right, I need to just pull back a little bit here. And what I'd personally recommend, and when this is what, this is what happens to me when I feel, if, I'm not sure if I'm coming down with something or it's getting close to deload. I'm not quite at overreach, but I'm starting to see the signs kick in. What I end up doing is that week, and again, there's going to be so many bloody opinions with this, guys. So keep an open mind here. But I would go in and not necessarily look to beat the logbook that week. That week would be I'm going to train and maintain the weights I've already lifted because I have been beating my logbook. So that is my driver. Another good extension of this, if you're using anabolics, this is something personally for me that I had in this last training block off the back of doing an exposure beforehand. So I did my primo exposure, extended that training block because I've got the rehab in there. You know, as I say, I did a 12-week block just because I was able to do that. I wouldn't ordinarily do that. Had a deload when I went over to Denmark with Kimmy and tied that in nicely there as well to be at her show and to really immerse there. It wasn't appropriate for me to be going off training. It was about her. It was a big trip and it just made sense. So I come off the back of that. And then it's like, okay, so my focus for this block, having done the primo exposure and absolutely progressed a lot of my lifts, the superpower of primo, guys. Having come off the back of that deload, my main focus for that block was to purely be able to maintain or beat the logbook. And this training block has been harder. I haven't beaten the logbook, absolutely not as much as when the primo was in, but it's been harder to be able to keep increasing the weight I'm lifting with the intention, the execution, and what I'm doing there. But that's where I've been able to go, right, so what would be logical in my mind to facilitate being able to still progress, still enjoy the gym, but not be a dickhead and injure myself again? And I just had this in that deload. I just had this sort of conversation with myself. I'm in control of a lot of my training, my physique stuff, my nutrition, etc. And I have input, but very much so I am a part of that input now, which is not what I've done previously, but it's fucking cool. So I have a word with myself. What is my main focus here? I want to know what my main driver is in this block. I'm still feeling pretty beat up off the back of doing the long training block, going over to Denmark, coming off the primo, feeling that lull after having the anabolics in. Okay, so let's just keep the logbook where it is. Let's just try and eke some progressions in as and when I can. Explore, if I can do that with some load, putting some biscuits on, being able to just squeeze another rep out, up the weights appropriately. And that was my goal for the last block. So this gives you an example of everything tied into what I'm saying today. Being able to, rather than facilitate the first week back in, feeling still a bit, well, and then trying to just fucking wham through it. Actually, it was like this first week, if I need to auto regulate a little bit here, push and pull a bit of volume, I can. Ideally, I want to keep the logbook where it is. Recovery, is that unlock? Yes, it is. Am I facilitating progression? For me, and that's when you look at progression, you always think progression is pushing, pushing, pushing. For me, I progressed so much in the primo block that it was like, right, if I can solidify that almost, it was like a mission in that last block. I want to solidify what I've done in that primo block, and I do not want to drop the weights. If I need to auto regulate, I need to auto regulate, but the goal is to really try and keep what I earned in that primo exposure. And that's what I've been able to do. Now having a deload and then going back in to another training block where I would look to facilitate progression again. So these are ideas, these are thought processes, these are things that I feel are nice to listen to and sort of understand a bit more about. Obviously, this is, training is very open to opinions. It's open to potentially people going, I wouldn't do it like that, or I'd do it like this. That's absolutely fine, guys. In the world of physique development, in the world in general, everyone has different ways to do things. Everyone has different methods. Everyone has different structures. What facilitates progression for me, although it might be the same ethos, we're probably all going to have a different training plan, a different setup, different kit, different parts of our journey, different categories, right? The list goes on. But this is purely a bit of an exploration for you guys to listen, take on board some of the things I've spoken about. If you have enjoyed listening, of course, share it on your story for me. If you have any questions or expansions that you'd like me to delve into, again, let me know. But hope you have enjoyed this extra little episode to be able to just get those cogs turning a bit and also just listen to a nice episode talking about training, which is our favourite place in the world. Hopefully, because it is, of course, a huge part of bodybuilding. So, guys, thank you for listening, as always, and I will speak to you real soon.